In the northwest, feeling quite cool here, I imagine, but temperatures widely are well above average. And in the sunshine, look at that, 14, 15, maybe even 16 degrees Celsius. Another chilly start on Thursday. Again, the possibility of a few fog patches in the south. A bit more cloud for Northern Ireland, maybe the odd shower here, but a drier day in western Scotland. Some rain across the far north. Increasing chance of some showers in the west, but for most, Thursday's another day of sunshine and probably the warmest day of the week, 15, 16, maybe 17 Celsius.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The latest GB News travel.
Good evening, I'm Johnny Ratner. Long delays continue on the M60 in Greater Manchester heading clockwise. A lorry overturned just before junction 17, the A56 Prestwich exit. All lanes are back open, but it's still queuing back round to junction 9 at Trafford Park. And in Nottinghamshire, a few miles southeast of Worksop, a serious accident this morning that continues to be investigated involving two lorries and a car close as the A1 southbound near to Upper Moreton, just off the A614. And in Hertfordshire on the M1 northbound, a car's broken down, partly blocking the motorway just north of Redbourne, so if you're heading towards Luton, one to bear in mind. West Sussex, north of Horsham, the A24 at Kingsfold, that's still blocked off by a multi-vehicle collision. And in West Sussex, the A27 is closed on the Arundel bypass. A car and a motorbike have collided just off the A284, causing queues. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
It's the final week to see how you could be one of two big winners in our latest giveaway, as we have two prize bundles that have to be won. There's two lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16, along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. Hurry, lines close on the 7th of March. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word. Well, the Ukraine story is very fast-moving, but I think today what we've seen from President Zelensky is the beginning of something perhaps very constructive. Was he bullied by the Americans? Has he made the right choice? And should we send British troops to Ukraine as part of a peacekeeping force? I'll also talk about why 200 Victoria Crosses owned by Lord Ashcroft will no longer be on display at the Imperial War Museum. And I will be joined by Tom Bauer to talk about his latest book about Mohammed al-Fayed, The Fall of Fayed. As ever, all of Tom's books are extraordinary, and this really is quite a tale of corruption that goes right to the heart, right to the very top, actually, of British society. But first, let's get the news with Sam Francis.
Nigel, thank you, and a very good evening to you. Just coming up to 1 minute past 7, the top story tonight. Volodymyr Zelensky says Ukraine is ready to negotiate for peace if Russia agrees to a truce on missiles, on bombs and attacks on civilian infrastructure. In a social media post this afternoon, the Ukrainian president said nobody wants peace more than Ukrainians and that he's ready to work under Donald Trump's leadership to reach a lasting deal. It follows a row between the two leaders over US military aid, which President Trump has now put on hold. Zelensky called their recent meeting in Washington regrettable, but says it is now the time to make things right. He's also reaffirmed Ukraine's commitment to signing a minerals and security deal with the United States. Meanwhile, JD Vance is facing backlash after calling Britain's military contributions to the Ukraine war disrespectful amid a growing row between the UK and the US over aid to Ukraine. The US Vice President appeared to dismiss Sir Keir Starmer's offer to send UK troops to help the peace. British politicians are now demanding an apology, with the Defence Secretary calling Vance's comments misjudged.
If you want real security guarantees, if you want to actually ensure that Vladimir Putin does not invade Ukraine again, the very best security guarantee is to give Americans economic upside in the future of Ukraine. That is a way better security guarantee than 20,000 troops from some random country that hasn't fought a war in 30 or 40 years.
Meanwhile, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage, this very own show, he has hit back at the US Vice President, saying he's wrong about Britain's military role.
JD Vance is wrong. Wrong. For 20 years in Afghanistan, pro rata, our size against America's, we spent the same amount of money, we put the same number of men and women in, and we suffered the same losses. We stood by America all through those 20 years, putting in exactly the same contribution. And all right, they may be 6 times bigger, but we did our bit. So on this one, JD is wrong.
JD Vance, though, has defended his comments, insisting he never mentioned the UK or France, and has praised both countries for fighting bravely alongside the US. In other news tonight, the trial of triple killer Carl Clifford has heard he raped his ex-girlfriend in a violent sexual act of spite before murdering her and her family with a crossbow and knife. The 26-year-old admitted killing Louise Hunt, her mother Carol and sister Hannah at their Hertfordshire home last July, but he denies rape. Prosecutors say he carefully planned the attacks after Ms Hunt ended their relationship. Louise described the relationship as sucking the life out of her before breaking up with Kyle just weeks before the attack. The trial continues. And the King has made a rare visit to a Royal Navy warship at sea, meeting sailors on HMS Prince of Wales before its biggest mission yet. His Majesty flew by helicopter to the aircraft carrier in the English Channel and thanked crew there for their extraordinarily valuable service, he said. The £3 billion ship will soon set sail for Japan, leading the UK's strike group in a mission to boost defence partnerships. It's also the first time in nearly 40 years a reigning monarch has boarded a Royal Navy ship while at sea.
I can only say that I take immense pride in you, the men and women who bring this vessel to life with such indomitable spirit, for your vital service on behalf of us all.
That's the news on GB News. I'll be back with you for a full roundup at 8 o'clock. And, well, we heard from him during those headlines there. Let's hear from him live now. It's Nigel Farage.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Good evening. Well, boy, it's a fast-moving and very important story. Since I was last with you, we've had the meeting in the White House that erupted into a row. The American president and vice president feeling that President Zelensky was being ungrateful, but boy, did they snap back. Somehow, I think that meeting, that row was necessary. I think psychologically it was very difficult for the Ukrainian president to go into a room to sign a document that begins a process that accepts losing Crimea for good. And so I understand why Zelensky, wasn't really very keen to do it. I then thought, well, it's only a matter of time before he comes back and signs this minerals agreement. But last night, we saw with one of the news agencies, Zelensky saying that he thought the war could go on for a very, very long time. I have to say my heart sunk. And then, of course, I woke to the news this morning, unsurprisingly, that Trump said, that's it. No more aid. It's all over. And then this afternoon, we get a long statement coming out from President Zelensky, and it's very, very fulsome. He makes it very, very clear. We are ready to work fast to end the war. He talks about prisoner releases. He talks about truces. He talks about reiterating Ukraine's commitment to peace. He does, of course, make the point, quite sensibly, that any ceasefires would have to have Russian support as well. And then he goes on to say, as regards the minerals agreement, Ukraine is ready to sign it at any time. Now, I think this is a good thing, not a bad thing. I think the minerals deal that the Americans have put together is actually very, very clever. Clever in the sense that it would mean many thousands of Americans would be on Ukrainian soil, plus tens of billions of dollars of American investment. It's also clever because if American technology is able to extract the right quantities of rare earth metals, it'll mean a lot of money, not just for America, but for Ukraine as well. And this begins a conversation, firstly about the ceasefire, which, as I say, has to include Russia. But it also begins the conversation, the debate about whether or not the Americans having that economic interest and human interest is enough of a security guarantee, or if countries are going to need to send troops. And I think the real debate that people are going to be having over the next weeks, possibly months, and who knows, it could even be years, is should the UK send troops to Ukraine? Tweet, please, #Farage on GB News, or email farage@gbnews.com. I'm joined in the studio by Rob Clark, defence consultant and Army veteran. Plus, I've got Sereno Jayawardena, former Conservative MP and Minister, and Joe Phillips, journalist and former spin doctor. Rob, it's almost so fast-moving that one's nervous to say anything, but I think this statement that we've seen from Zelensky today, this is significant, isn't it?
Oh, there's no two ways about looking at it, Nigel. It's hard to believe that evening in the White House was 96 hours ago. Yeah. Events have moved so fastly, and in particular today. I think it underlines this Ukrainian perspective almost of like a reset in relations with Washington, which for various reasons I think is obviously important. I think, first and foremost, a lot of people have asked me, whose fault was it last Friday? Was it President Trump and J.D. Vance? Was it President Zelensky? And in all honesty, I think bit of both sides have to shoulder some of the burden in sort of how disastrous that meeting was. I think those of us who watched it have never seen anything like it. So this attempts some sort of positive communication and reset to Washington.
Maybe it was needed. Maybe in a funny sort of way it was needed.
Well, if it hasn't happened, I think we could see this deteriorating so fastly, so quickly. And that would obviously, the ramifications to European countries would then spiral out of control. So for good or for bad, I think it's happened. And I think now positive steps can be taken, crucially going forwards.
So this gets signed, I'm imagining within a week or so. It'll happen pretty quickly. I know it will. Was Zelensky bullied into this?
I think, to be honest, I think the realistic perspective was if he didn't sign it or if Ukraine weren't prepared to come back to Washington and renegotiate very quickly. I think he could have seen the US military aid plummeting very, very fast. Now, we've already seen that this morning or this afternoon here in London, the likelihood, the almost certainty that that's going to get paused, suspended temporarily for however long. But crucially, from a military perspective, I don't think that's going to make as much of an effort on the ground in Ukraine, on the front lines, as some people suspect. So I think that's going to be interesting with the next few weeks, the next few months, how that's going to play out. But no, absolutely, I think it was in Zelensky's personal and Ukraine's interest for us to go forward.
No, I think it really is a very common sense thing, and it's the right thing, but it's just the beginning. So security guarantees, that's going to be the next big debate. You know, I did ask a question at PMQs yesterday. Was that big American presence enough? But it didn't get an answer, obviously. And the Prime Minister seems keen to send British troops. A coalition of the willing, you know, the old Iraq War phrase has come back again. But trouble is, if the Americans don't send troops, isn't there a danger that the British Prime Minister turns around and sees that the coalition of the willing is just us?
Yes, so there's a real incentive for European countries to, if they see either the Stars and Stripes or the Union flag on another soldier's arm or shoulder, it really, really helps motivate other European countries. They know the fighting capability and the power that the British military traditionally have had, along with the Americans. In terms of security guarantees, which we were speaking about earlier, I don't think it just rests on this idea of the American backstop being the nuclear question or an Article 5 treaty with NATO. There's many, many elements of the American security guarantee that can bring into play for Ukraine. For example, the intelligence sharing, the satellites, the data, the targeting links, things like this, and ultimately the ability to rapidly reshore long-range artillery missiles at pace, which the Europeans, quite frankly, don't have any capability whatsoever to do anymore. So there's many options for that security guarantee post just having US boots on the ground.
How does that sound to you, Joe Phillips?
Well, there's an awful lot of ground to cover, and it does seem as though we're spending an awful lot of time talking about a rapprochement between Trump and Zelensky, when actually it should be a ceasefire between Putin and Zelensky. And I would be very interested to know what Putin is thinking in Moscow, because we've had no indication whatsoever that he is interested, willing, other than, you know, a few rude and vile things. I mean, I do think Zelensky has been bullied into this, and I think he was willing to sign a minerals agreement when he went to the White House last week, but it all went off track because he wanted some sort of security. I mean, but I do think, just on the point that Rob's just made on that issue of security, there's real concern within the security world about America withdrawing its watchful eye, if you like, on Russian cybersecurity. And that would be devastating, wouldn't it?
That's a fair point.
It would be devastating, but I think there's enough people within the new administration, in the Pentagon and in Washington more broadly, who do view this still in the hard, real terms, the hard, real practical terms that we do. And we forget, you know, there are treaty-bound obligations, we have historic partnerships, bilateral, trilateral agreements, the Five Eyes, things like this. I think this is far deeper. The relationship, the security and intelligence sharing relationship with Washington is far deeper than quick sound bites coming out from Washington, regardless of who they come from. I think this is going to be incredibly important going forward over the next few weeks to gauge Washington and President Trump's administration's intentions, how much to bring out or how much to realign. But I think you're right, the cyber sort of angle is going to be incredibly important.
There's been no pressure around a lot. It appears that there's been no pressure, there probably has behind the scenes, on Putin at all. But I think the answer to Joe is actually that what's happened today is that Ukraine and America are united again. That of itself must put some pressure on Putin, mustn't it?
Yeah, and that's hugely important because it's really clear to everyone, bar Putin probably, that Putin's the bad guy here. And so it's important that the West is at one in support for Ukraine. It's really important Ukraine's back on the coming back to the table here. Trump operates in mysterious ways, shall we say. You know, he's got his own style of doing things. It's not perhaps what we would have done. I don't think anyone actually liked seeing what we saw on the television. But if it has got Zelensky to the table, if it does get this deal done, if it makes sure that Putin comes to the table, which is critical in getting a long and sustainable peace in Ukraine, then actually some good will have been done.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's where we are. Rob, we were talking the other day about an effective peacekeeping force needing to be about 100,000 soldiers, which is perhaps about right, I don't know. So let's say the British contribution's 10,000 soldiers. So you have 10,000, you know, inactive. You've got 10,000 in reserve, and probably another 10,000 in supplies, logistics. Looking at about 30,000 people. It's, you know, for every one person up the front, it's a couple behind. We couldn't do it, could we?
Absolutely not. This is a question I've been asked consistently for the last sort of 2 or 3 weeks. Just to put some numbers in perspective to help some of your viewers maybe, when we talk about the size of the deployment needed for peacekeeping or peace monitoring, I look at the Korean War and the outcome for that. The 38th parallel is roughly about 160 miles long. The Ukrainian border for the front lines, the various front lines, are about 800 miles. Yeah, so it's about 6 or 7 times the size.
What a thought.
We still have, 70 years later, we still have 24 to 30,000 US troops and all the capabilities the US bring, including nuclear assets by sea and by air, in Korea. So this is going to be an incredibly long-term situation, an incredibly manpower and resource intensive, which, when we go back to this 2.5% recent uplift in defence, it won't even...
Doesn't even touch the sides.
To the point where Robert Jenrick made an excellent point today, and it's broadly very, very correct. That wouldn't even cover, never mind inflation over the next 2 years, that wouldn't even cover the stocks that we've depleted. So in terms of the numbers that you've just mentioned, Nigel, realistically, and I've had these conversations with people within the MOD, we're looking max a brigade, an armoured brigade, which is about 5,000 soldiers. The current strength of the army is around 72,500. Many of those are non-deployable, roughly about a fifth. So that takes it down to about 60,000 or so. And in terms of, you hit the nail on the head, for every person you have in service, you have 2 or 3 enablers back. Then you have the rotations and people coming and going, training, leaving, external current commitments within NATO. It's an enormous task. And to be quite frank, even sending an armoured brigade of about 5,000 soldiers would stress the army and cost billions extra a year. That hasn't been costed.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. That's without the politics of it all, which we're going to discuss after the break, because I do think, after 20 years in Afghanistan, after Iraq, after the very big human cost that we put in the last quarter of a century, I'm not sure Parliament's quite at tune with the people on this one. Finally, Rob, we've heard nothing about territory here, have we? Nothing at all. Are we all assuming that Crimea stays with Russia?
I think it's, regrettably, I think it's almost certain. I think this is going to be one of the few, never mind no NATO troops in Ukraine, never mind no US troops in Ukraine, I think Putin's bottom line will be Crimea becomes Russia. And that's going to be, having been to Ukraine several times, I think that's going to be an awful pill for the Ukrainians to swallow. But swallow it they must if this deal goes ahead.
And that, I think, is what Zelensky found impossible in the White House last Friday, psychologically, to be remembered as the Ukrainian president that actually finally said it's not coming back. Rob Clark, a pleasure to have you in the studio. In a moment, we will continue the politics of all of this, because I think this issue of sending troops to Ukraine, it's pretty clear, quite a big majority in Parliament are very much in favour of the idea with certain caveats, but really? Is that how the rest of the country feels? I want to know what you think. Please, should we send troops to Ukraine? Farage at GBNews.com. Yes.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
I watched the video yesterday with Meghan Markle announcing this relaunch. What did you make of the video?
It's constantly this rebranding thing that's going on, which is quite interesting. We've had different kind of, way back to Sussex Royal at the very beginning. Here we've now got this new lifestyle series that's coming out. Obviously, she's got this new brand that's going to go alongside it. It's very difficult because royals, as we've said many, many times before, this is not something royals typically kind of do. And obviously these are no longer, if you like, working members of the royal family, but still, Prince Harry, as I keep saying, is a senior member of the royal family. So it's quite a kind of uncharted territory that they're going into. And as I said, this is a bit of a disaster because everything they seem to kind of do when it comes to branding, it just doesn't seem to work.
They seem to really be struggling to find their purpose in the US. Do you think that's fair? I mean, Prince Harry, of course, has got the Invictus Games, which is just the most wonderful thing that he has set up. But it appears that they're not obviously part of the royal family anymore in terms of working royals. They're not senior working royals, but not able to make it in the business world yet either.
You're right, Elliot. I think the Invictus Games is definitely the kind of saving grace. That's the thing that everybody kind of admires and respects them for. But then it's when they keep going back into this kind of celebrity branded lifestyle. I don't think anyone's really that hugely interested. As you said, in the States, you kind of hear people are for them, people are against them. I think most people would rather that they weren't kind of doing this. I think we've said this so many times before that, as members of the royal family, they should continue down that line and going into this kind of business world. It just, I think I'm right in saying historically with royals and kind of business, it doesn't really work.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So I asked you, should the UK send troops to Ukraine? Some of your, just a really very small sample of your many reactions coming back. John says, I do not support the UK sending troops to Ukraine as our armed forces have been so depleted over the years, we haven't got the capability. Our useless politicians should be spending our money on our own people, such as farmers, pensioners, and completely stopping immigration. Sue says, only Putin can stop this invasion. Ukraine are only defending themselves. It's a fair point. Stephen says, definitely no British boots on the ground in Ukraine. J.D. Vance needs to apologise to Zelensky and wind his neck in. He could start the next world war. Well, the Trump administration would argue very strongly that they are trying to do the opposite. Joe Phillips, however Trump operates, and whatever happened in the Oval Office the other day, and I know you're appalled by it, as, by the way, a majority of people are. There's no question about that. But without him, would we even be talking about a peace deal?
I think it's a good point, Nigel. I think it was handled very badly. I feel extremely sorry for Zelensky, who English is not his first language.
He's pretty good.
He's pretty good, yeah. But when you've got people shouting over you, I think what has appalled most people was the bad manners of his hosts. It was despicable. Absolutely despicable.
When you go into an important meeting, you ask questions about what's the other person like, how they're going to behave. Anyone that knows Trump would have said, turn up, well-dressed, turn up, showing respect. Well, because that's how Trump is.
Well, you see, that's where I claim I want to disagree, because he's just like that. That's what people say about blokes who go out and get absolutely plastered on payday, go home and beat their wives, and they say, that's just Nigel. He doesn't.
Trump expects people to be respectful. I promise you.
Well, I mean, frankly, if it comes down to whether he was wearing what he's worn to meet the king and various other leaders.
But personal relations matter, don't they?
Personal relations are absolutely crucial.
And let's not waste too much time on this.
No.
I mean, the row happened. It was unseemly. Yeah, no question. But we've moved on. But Ranul, in the break, it's very interesting. General election comes, and before you know it, Prime Minister Sunak is talking, we're bringing back national service. How did that work out for you?
Well, it was really interesting that a lot of people who previously had supported the idea of national service, suddenly, with a live conflict in, the European theatre, suddenly decided they didn't want their boys and girls going to war. And so, it's entirely unsurprising to hear GB News viewers have been writing in the last few minutes saying that they don't want troops committed, because we are so depleted as a military. Ever since John Major made cuts, so they've been continued under every administration of every colour to our defence spending. And, we've got to really look very carefully the resources that we have.
So you're pretty nervous about sending troops?
I'm very nervous about that, because I don't think that we have the ability right now to sustain that for the long run, which is what's crucial here.
But even if we did, and even if only a smaller number of our troops were going, because maybe the Americans decide they are going to go, politically, after 20 years of Afghanistan and Iraq, I think Parliament's out of touch with the people on this.
Well, I think that it's about hearts and heads, Nigel. I mean, at the moment, I would think, 90% of the British public are on the side of Zelensky. They see him as, a David against Goliath. They think that the behaviour in the Oval Office...
They hate the invasion.
They don't like Donald Trump. All of that sort of stuff. They don't like the behaviour. They dislike Putin even more and don't trust Putin. So I think there's all of that, which is the heart side, but when it comes down to it, which is where I think the government is going to have to work very carefully, because it's not just about boots on the ground, it's about the fact that they've made cuts to international aid in order to find this money, which, as Rob was just saying, doesn't touch the side. We know that, but it was a gesture, and it was important to say that before Starmer went.
And I mean, to even contemplate this, we're looking at billions, and isn't the real worry with this, and this was, in the end, really the problem with Afghanistan, that if there's no clear end objective...
There's no plan, exactly.
And what was interesting, I thought Rob mentioned, I mean, Korea... The settlement in Korea
1953.
is over 70 years ago, and still huge numbers of troops
I know,
there.
exactly. Well, look, you know, Greece, Cyprus.
Yes.
You know.
So we emotionally support Ukraine as a country, but we can't do much more about this.
Well, we've got
Is what you're saying.
Is what I'm saying is you're absolutely right. You've got to have an end plan. Afghanistan was a disaster, and don't forget it was Trump who decided to pull troops out of Afghanistan. Iraq was a disaster for Tony Blair, and I think, you know, his reputation has never recovered from that.
No.
We saw what happened when David Cameron wanted to get involved in Syria and Libya. All of that.
Well, Libya was a
stuff.
disaster.
Libya was a total disaster, and then, of course, that played into Syria. Then you had Obama saying it's a red line. Well, they crossed that.
I know.
So I think it's difficult, but just very quickly, the point is that you spend that money, and at the same time you're cutting everything else.
Not a good look.
It's not a good look, and people won't put up with it.
We're not going to send troops, are we?
Well, right now, I'm not sure how it can be done. And, of course, Starmer's promising this increased spend from aid, but a lot of that's going to go on Chagos anyway. So it's not really spending to grow our military capability.
I'm going to need a whole lot of convincing on this one. At the minute, I don't think we've got the
only
scope.
way you do it is UN peacekeepers. But, you know, presumably America wouldn't buy that.
But that's quite difficult with the UN, because the UN Security Council is full of countries that would veto the idea anyway.
Well, and you've got, you know, America voting with North Korea and Belarus last week.
Yeah, there's no easy answer. But just to end this, and we've done 2 segments on Ukraine today because it is a very, very important story. Just to end, I think what's happened today is a good thing. It's a start, but there's one hell of a long way to go. In a moment, let's talk about the Imperial War Museum and why on earth 200 Victoria Crosses, indeed a few George Crosses too, owned by Lord Ashcroft, will no longer be on display.
Can't wait to get in that sea.
Lovely and warm.
Just like the feeling of having great travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Plenty of warm sunshine across southern parts of the UK this week, but it'll also be fine in Italy. Meanwhile, unsettled in Spain with increasingly wet and windy weather developing. Those showery outbreaks of rain also pushing into Madeira, but the wetter spot will be eastern parts of Spain, the Balearics, where it will be very windy in addition to the wet weather. Italy, largely dry with sunny spells, likewise for Greece, albeit with a gusty wind. And similar weather is expected to last throughout much of the week.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Basically, we know the people behind Bond are the Broccoli family. And for the last 30 years, Cubby Broccoli's daughter, Barbara, and her half-brother, Michael G. Wilson, have been looking after the franchise and done very well with it. When you think of what a great Bond Daniel Craig was. Yeah. Now, we haven't had a new movie for 4 years, and now it looks like Amazon are going to take over the helm, and apparently relations are strained between Barbara and Stephen and Amazon, which to me sounds like they've, even though it's their baby, they've been pushed aside. So they've decided to step back. So now this new guy, Jeff Bezos from Amazon, is asking you who you would like to be the next 007. One name in the papers is Tom Cruise. But he's American. But
no.
Well,
this is what worries me about Amazon having it, though. It's going to become really Americanised.
Yeah, or very, very woke. I mean, are we going to have a woman playing James Bond?
I don't know if Jeff Bezos is that woke, is he?
Well, no, but Amazon are quite woke, aren't
they? No, they were woke when it was trendy to be woke, and now that we've got Trump in the White House, then they're not going to be woke at all. I mean, it's the Americanization I worry about, and I do know somebody else who was in for it, who is Ian Fleming's great nephew, who would have kept it in Britain, right?
It should be kept in Britain,
and it's the Broccolis. They were American. Oh, she is American. But, I mean, they were based in Britain. And we want it to stay British.
They'll keep it at Pine Right time.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Exciting news. Every Friday, my Patrick Christie's Tonight Show is going to have a twist to it. We're welcoming some special guests. You. That's right, on Fridays I'm going to be doing my show in front of a live studio audience because this show is about you and what you have to say. It's going to be the same big debates, same big topics, same big opinions, but every Friday night at 9 p.m. you are invited to come on down to Patrick Christie's Tonight to be a part of the action. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lord Ashcroft, who is 79 today, has amassed the most extraordinary collection of Victoria Crosses and George Crosses ever assembled by anybody, and written many books on those that have received it, and he's fascinated by courage. He, 15 years ago, put 200 of these medals on display in the Imperial War Museum. He spent £5 million building the gallery, and huge numbers of people have been to see the medals and the stories behind the medals. I do understand that the lease was on the verge of running out, but it could have been renewed. He was happy for it to be renewed. And without any real prior warning, he's told the medals are no longer wanted. What on earth is going on at the Imperial War Museum? Well, I'm joined down the line by Piers Noonan, Chairman and CEO of Noonan's Mayfair, and a man who's bought and sold a few Victoria Crosses over the years. Piers, has the Imperial War Museum gone woke?
I think it's very difficult not to conclude that that is exactly what has happened, yes. I think what they're trying to do is to sort of whitewash any medals from the days of the British Empire out of their display. In fact, the Lord Ashcroft's Gallery is the only place you can see anything from the Victorian era in the Imperial War Museum at all. So when they go, there will be nothing there, yes. It's really from the First World War onwards, that's the only things you will see there. And they've said themselves that the reason that they're closing the gallery is in order to basically deal with more modern campaigns. It's very, very sad. And I have to say, I think it's very disrespectful. I think it's very disrespectful to all of the recipients of those medals who fought and in many cases died for our country. So it's a sad day, and I hope they reconsider.
So you're telling me that, Islandwana, the rout of the British Army at Islandwana, Rorke's Drift, that none of these things, can I go to the Imperial War Museum?
Go to the Imperial War Museum if you want to see anything to do with that. No.
I am absolutely astonished. I understand, though, there was an advertisement on the London Tube recently that there is going to be an Imperial War Museum display about sustainable fashion. Were you aware of that?
I was aware. I think it's no secret that the Imperial War Museum and other museums as well are absolutely obsessed with sustainability, and any excuse to find some way of wheeling it into a display or whatever they jump on it. So yeah, it's obviously ridiculous. but they are under pressure to do these things. It's worth bearing in mind, of course, that the museums get their money from government funding, largely charitable donations.
Yeah.
These are the sorts of boxes that in this day and age, unfortunately, they have to tick.
Well, Piers Noonan, final question. When you sell your next Victoria Cross at auction, what will it go for?
Well, we do have one coming up, estimated at 180 to 220,000 from memory, and I'm sure it'll sell for within that sort of reading it on.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid to do this, you need Lord Ashcroft's very deep pockets. Piers Noonan, thank you very much indeed. Right. I find it extraordinary. I mean, in America, the tide, the pendulum has come back.
Yeah.
Here, it's funny, I opened a letter this morning from, I better not name them, a very major pension fund provider with a bit of my money that they're managing, and they've told me that it's going to be managed in future in a sustainable way. It's still happening, isn't it?
Very sadly, yes. I mean, there is some hope. Aberdeen has now rebranded itself, or it's not a rebrand back to Aberdeen.
It's refound its vowels, hasn't it?
Exactly. So there is some hope. But it is astonishing what's happening here at the Imperial War Museum. You know, right now, when there is a land war in Europe, surely it is the time to tell the stories of those who have fought for this country in the past. And, you know, I'm thinking about the next generation, my children and those to come. You know, they need to hear these stories because they can't hear it from people they have sadly gone. No. It is such an important duty that the Imperial War Museum has, and it's the clues in the name. It is about Britain's history, and we should be proud of it.
Well, wasn't that astonishing? Yeah. I cannot believe there's nothing about Rorke's Drift there.
No, I mean, I'm staggered. I mean, if they said, look, you know, this building is going to be condemned or something, I'm sure Michael Ashcroft would find somewhere else to put. What about the Army Museum? I mean, I don't know where...
Well, I'm afraid they've had a few similar problems over the course of the last couple of years.
I think it's a terrible shame, and I think, you know, it's very difficult for museums, as Piers said. You know, they get funding from the public. They have to...
well, government,
Government, well, that's us. You know, and they have to do all of those things, or else you get the problem that we've seen with the Tate, with BP sponsorship and all of those sort of things. But
it just feels wrong. I was told by someone that knows the museum well that 40% of visitors to the museum go straight to the gallery. 40% of those that go straight to the gallery, because then it puts everything else in context.
Yes, and then the argument is, you know, how do you get more people in? Well, you can tell the story.
Well, absolutely.
So, well, those are stories.
Extraordinary stories, including the fella who was in a Lancaster and the wing was on fire, and he climbed out on the wing to put the fire out, and he got, of course, taken off by the wind, and parachute caught fire, but he landed in a thorn bush and survived. Some extraordinary stories. The Imperial War Museum London has proudly displayed Victoria and George crosses since 1968. We remain committed to sharing these stories, our displays exploring the past 80 years of post-Second World War conflict, including the Cold War, Falklands and wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, are less well represented. Our aim is to address this by creating new gallery spaces and upper floors to share more stories of conflicts that are within many of our visitors' living memory. We're very grateful to Lord Ashcroft and other private lenders who have enabled us, past tense, to display these important medals since the gallery opened. Well, just the words in that statement rather back up the fact, if you want to learn about the Falklands, it might be a very good place to go to, and nothing wrong with that. The story of men yomping across the islands and all of it. But if they literally are wiping out our imperial history, then frankly, the place isn't worth a light. Now, the What the Farage moment is what happened in the Serbian parliament yesterday. Let's have a look at some of these pictures. Well, disorder, after all, it is the Balkans. Smoke bombs being thrown, 3 MPs injured, 1 suffered a stroke, so it's not funny, and quite extraordinary scenes. Please don't ask what the cause of the problem was. It goes back to an accident where a roof collapsed and there are claims of negligence. But I suppose anybody with any sense of history would say, well, it is the Balkans and these things do tend to happen. The reason I showed that clip, Joe, was we can get very depressed about the state of our politics and the ineptitude of our government and the calibre of our members of Parliament, and we get terribly upset if they say a word out of place that could be construed to be prejudicial in any way. Sort of puts it in context.
Well, yes, I mean, makes Prime Minister's questions tomorrow look very tame indeed.
Well, I think so too. Randall?
Yeah, I mean, look, politicians of all political colours get a lot of criticism, but actually the really important thing is, more often than not, we disagree well in this country, and that's so important.
Yeah, that's right. Final thought, because I'm losing you for the last segment, because Tom Bauer's coming in with his book on Mohammed Al-Fayed. Shrove Tuesday, Pancake Day, what are you giving up for Lent?
I don't give anything up.
Don't give anything up. Randall?
I think I'm going to try again, as I often do, to give up booze for Lent. So,
there we are.
So, you know, we won't be going out in the next month, I'm sure.
Well, I wish you luck. And I'm giving up for Lent. That's what I'm doing.
Right,
in a moment, after the break, Tom Bauer, his new book, The Fall of Fayed. How on earth did this man get away with it for so long?
Evening. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Another cold one in the south tonight, so a frost first thing tomorrow and some dense patches of fog. For many, though, it's another day of sparkling spring sunshine. The main difference to that will be across the far northwest, where these weather fronts are bringing rain currently, and they'll linger for much of tomorrow. Quite a wet evening across the northwest. That rain just trickling down towards Glasgow. We'll see some patchy rain across the north of Northern Ireland especially, but further south, most of England and Wales staying dry. A bit more cloud across Northern England, North Wales, but clear skies in the south, allowing that frost. Quite a contrast with temperatures between the far northwest and the far south. A frost here and some quite dense patches of fog. Now, the fog will take a while to clear, so some of the main routes in and around the southeast, the M4, for example, also the A303, could be quite dense, that fog first thing. But generally fine and bright to start the day across much of England and Wales. Quite a cloudy start for most of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it will be a mild start, but still quite windy, gusty winds bringing further outbreaks of rain, particularly to the Highlands and the Western Isles, and they'll linger for a good part of the day. With the winds coming from the south-west, the far northeast of Scotland should have some sunshine, and elsewhere plenty of spring sunshine for England and Wales, probably brightening up a bit through the day across southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. The wet weather, though, will persist in the northwest, feeling quite cool here, I imagine, but temperatures widely are well above average, and in the sunshine, look at that, 14, 15, maybe even 16 degrees Celsius. Another chilly start on Thursday. Again, the possibility of a few fog patches in the south. A bit more cloud for Northern Ireland, maybe the odd shower here, but a drier day in western Scotland. Some rain across the far north. Increasing chance of some showers in the west, but for most, Thursday's another day of sunshine and probably the warmest day of the week. 15, 16, maybe 17 Celsius.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
He's back. Tom Bauer is back with his latest book, The Fall of Fayed. And Tom, I don't know how you do it, but you produce these books and you learn things, and we learn things about very, very important public figures. And in terms of national life, I mean, this man was around in the press for decades. The battle to buy Harrods, onto his son Dodi and Diana being killed in that tunnel in Paris. What interested me was that you actually had the opportunity originally, a long time ago, to do an authorised biography of him. What happened?
Well, what happened was he offered me a huge amount of money to stop writing the unauthorised version. I got to know Fayed very well in the early 90s because of his battle with Tiny Rowland, who owned this company Lonhro, and he helped me a lot in my biography of Tiny, which sold terribly well. And he loved it because he was very critical of Tiny. He put it up all over Harrods.
They were at war with each other.
They were at war with each other over the fact that Fayed had got Harrods. Well, then I tried to get close to him when he was doing the Cash for Questions. He was feeding all this stuff, how he bribed MPs and how he bribed all sorts of people. And I was in his office during the summer of '97 quite a lot in Harrods. And he showed me often the photographs of him and Diana, who was in the south of France, with him and Dodie.
Yeah.
So when she died, I rang up his office and said, could I go to the Ritz and see the people who'd been with her just before he died? And she died, and then he flew me across in his helicopter 24 hours later with his head of security. And I spent the whole day interviewing the people in the Ritz who'd been with Diana and Dodie and heard this horrendous story, how they had been sent with the drunken driver at Fayed's orders. But also I saw then how Iran, armed bodyguards, was bugging people in their rooms, was running really a criminal organisation. So when I got back to London, I decided that the real focus should be on Fayed and get the truth about him.
So where does the story start? He's in Alexandria. He's a small-time, as I understand it, businessman. How does he suddenly catapult?
Well, what he does, he marries well. He marries a man called Khashoggi, who was the father of Adnan, who was the biggest arms dealer at the time, became.
Yeah.
And he learned from the father one vital thing, that the bigger the lie, the bigger the profit. The father was a vet, but sold himself to the King of Saudi Arabia as a doctor and became the head of Saudi Arabia's medical. Yeah, and that's why Fayed realised that he should lie when he came to England about his past.
So when he buys Harrods, is it all borrowed money?
All borrowed. That's what annoyed Tiny, because when Tiny gave him the shares in some scam, he thought he didn't have the money to buy it, but he borrowed it from the Sultan of Brunei.
Extraordinary, because, I mean, buying Harrods suddenly made him a figure. He was in the national press, I mean, which is way before Dodie and Diana.
Oh, absolutely.
He was in the press constantly.
He loved the publicity. He loved buying people. He loved, most of all, buying the royal family.
Yeah.
And that was a scandal.
And being part of the big English social summer scene, you know, he wanted to be at all the big events.
Yeah.
I mean, but it seemed to me, and he wanted to be accepted, didn't he?
He was desperate for a British passport, which they wouldn't give him because he was a crook. Because he'd been in Haiti and had been terribly crooked there, and he'd been in Dubai and been very crooked there. He'd done everything. He was a total utter monster, and everyone knew that he was a sexual predator. And everything
you say everyone knew, but the public didn't know this.
Well, they did from my book. But
they know now.
No, but I published that in 1998.
And so, but
when it was extraordinary, you see the things.
So why did the police take no action?
The police were corrupted. The politicians were corrupted. The palace was corrupted. There was no part of Britain.
The palace was corrupted.
Well, because the Queen and Prince Philip went to the Windsor Horse Show. Their host was Fayed. There were people in the palace who were taking hampers and other things from him as he sort of weigh his way in. I mean, this is a man who'd walk around with two briefcases, one with his office papers, the other with £50 notes. And he'd hand them out to MPs, to police, to everybody. And he got away with it.
So this book, above all, there are two things that fascinate me. One is you're saying that this guy was able to pretty much silence everybody through gifts or bribes, or call it what
and
you will.
Intimidation. He would use the police to intimidate people. He'd get his police protection officers to go to people who he didn't like, or employees or women, and threaten them with false arrest, and sometimes did arrest them, or got them locked up, or just literally threatened to beat them up.
How did he get away with it?
Well, because the police were corrupted.
But in the end, OK, you can't corrupt everybody.
Well, you can, you know, he proved it.
But you can't corrupt everybody, Tom Bauer. It's not possible, well, surely.
He did it. And what was the biggest scandal of all was that when he died, the BBC that night broadcast eulogies about him. And when they called me and I said I would say that he was a criminal, a rapist, a pimp, and corrupt, they said, we don't want to run that. You see, for many, many months, they wouldn't run the truth. Nobody would.
And since his death, the sexual allegations that were talked about years ago, but simply, it seems, forgotten, there's been a never-ending story about the extent of his sexual predation and misbehaviour, rapes, everything.
Well, because the women were terrified by his approaches. They were intimidated, or on a couple of occasions paid off. But it was a shocking story.
But a lot of people who were close to him must have known about these things.
Absolutely. They were paid off as well. They were paid huge salaries, and they were more interested in their pockets and in their own pleasure and their lifestyle than telling the truth and removing a terribly criminal man.
The big story, of course, that everybody historically is going to remember, above all, is the death of Diana and Dodi in that tunnel. I mean, did he really believe that there'd been a conspiracy?
Well, of course he didn't. He was a fantasist. But the most terrible thing is that for 10 years, the British establishment put up with his lie that Prince Philip had orchestrated the murder with MI6. And then they allowed the coroner's court to carry on for more than 4 months going into this fallacy and saying the most dreadful things about the Queen and Prince Philip and also Diana and the lot. And he got away with it. And then when the coroner's jury in the end said that it was all rubbish, he just walked out of the court and that was the end of it.
What do you think the truth was? Was she about to marry Dodi?
Of course not. No, that was his fantasy, nor was she pregnant. She was just a very unhappy woman that summer. Yeah. And he was very good at seducing and finding people's weaknesses. That was his talent. He knew how to buy his way in. And she was delighted to be able to take William and Harry to the south of France for a wonderful holiday.
A lovely yacht.
Lovely yacht, wonderful time. And she was looking for love. And Dodi was an amazingly good schmoozer. I mean, that's all he did. And his father paid him. And the two of them together were operators. I mean, it is a scandalous, awful story.
Finally, what's the lesson we learn about this book? Is the lesson that we learned that somebody else could come along and do the whole thing again? Or are we better now than that?
No. They'll always be able to find crooked policemen, crooked politicians, crooked people who are willing to be bought. And that is the tragedy, that it does happen very often. But whether it happened in the same way with the royal family, with someone as amazing as Diana, that is in the end which exposed the horror of Fayed. He's a monster who literally couldn't be slayed.
I find the whole thing absolutely... I find it fascinating, but in a sort of slightly unpleasant, uncomfortable... It's sad too, but it's uncomfortable. You know, of course, I repeat the point. There are corrupt people everywhere you go, but to think he managed to corrupt that many people, which is the contention...
And got away with it.
...of this book and got away with it. Well, Tom Bauer, absolutely, completely and utterly extraordinary. I'm joined in the studio by an establishment figure that I am certain would not have been corrupted by Mohammed Al-Fayed's money. But what Tom's saying is really quite concerning in a way.
Well, what I think is even more shocking is that people really did know, because my father used to get Tiny Rowland's missives, which were fascinating. They were the hero from zero, and these pamphlets would come through listing all the frauds that Fayed had committed. He's not Al-Fayed, he's just Fayed.
Yeah, OK.
He managed to swindle Papadoc Duvalier. I mean, his scale of corruption was quite extraordinary. And he would retaliate by sending pamphlets about Tiny Rowland saying what his background was, which was also quite exotic. And nobody did anything. And this was so interesting about Tom's books, because they're one to other people who've written about who are still in the public eye. And this doesn't get talked about either, and I probably get a message in my ear telling me not to talk about it.
Well, you won a case against Ofcom last week, Jacob. You're impregnable now.
If only. But that's what really worries me, is who else is there? And we've got increasing privacy laws who are using those privacy laws, super injunctions, you name it, to protect themselves about things that the inner circle may know about, but the British people aren't allowed to know about.
Absolutely. And the trouble is the judges go along with it.
The judges developed it. It all comes out of the terrible Human Rights Act. We didn't have a privacy law until we had the Human Rights Act.
Very interesting. Jacob, in 30 seconds, what's on tonight?
Well, we've got to talk about Donald Trump again.
Yeah.
I'm very interested in creative destruction, Schumpeter's term economically, and it's quite extraordinary. What Trump is doing, nobody else does. When you first hear it, it sounds as if it's destroying everything. And then suddenly, Europe's going to spend £650 billion on defence. It's very worrying. I think the world is a very dangerous place because creative destruction risks being more destruction than creative.
But that's what's happening, and it's trying to get to grips with a changing international scene.
He certainly gets results. I'm back tomorrow. Let's have a look at the weather.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Yes, it's time for your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Another cold one in the south tonight, so a frost first thing tomorrow and some dense patches of fog. For many, though, it's another day of sparkling spring sunshine. The main difference to that will be across the far northwest, where these weather fronts are bringing rain currently, and they'll linger for much of tomorrow. Quite a wet evening across the northwest. That rain just trickling down towards Glasgow. We'll see some patchy rain across the north of Northern Ireland especially, but further south, most of England and Wales staying dry. A bit more cloud across Northern England, North Wales, but clear skies in the south, allowing that frost. Quite a contrast with temperatures between the far northwest and the far south. A frost here and some quite dense patches of fog. Now, the fog will take a while to clear, so some of the main routes in and around the southeast, the M4, for example, so the A303 could be quite dense, that fog first thing. But generally fine and bright to start the day across much of England and Wales. Quite a cloudy start for most of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but it will be a mild start, but still quite windy, gusty winds bringing further outbreaks of rain, particularly to the Highlands and the Western Isles, and they'll linger for a good part of the day. With the winds coming from the south-west, the far northeast of Scotland should have some sunshine, and elsewhere plenty of spring sunshine for England and Wales, probably brightening up a bit through the day across southern Scotland and Northern Ireland. The wet weather that will persist in the northwest, feeling quite cool here, I imagine, but temperatures widely are well above average, and in the sunshine, look at that, 14, 15, maybe even 16 degrees Celsius. Another chilly start on Thursday. Again, the possibility of a few fog patches in the south. A bit more cloud for Northern Ireland, maybe the odd shower here, but a drier day in western Scotland. Some rain across the far north. Increasing chance of some showers in the west, but for most,